Hello, and welcome to this episode of The Thoughts of a Whole Brain Man. And today, the foolish musings of an accidental fool. Um, I think the accidental fool part is best attended to first. Um, I am an astrologer, and you may or may not know that in the world of astrology, to construct an astrological birth chart, you need a fixed point on a revolving ball called the Earth with which to be able to measure the positions or plot the positions of celestial objects. Because obviously, because the Earth is doing this all the time, everything seems to be coming around us all the time. So you can't say that something is here or there, because that depends on where you are and, of course, what time you are. Because the sun might be shining in your eyes in the morning above your head midday and shining in your ears in the evening before it sets, right? So one has to have a fixed meridian point against which all astrological calculations are based and correlated with in order to be able to determine the positions of things on the surface of the earth at any given time. And it just perchance happens that that fixed meridian point is the Greenwich meridian. We use the Greenwich meridian largely out of habit, and the habit was largely created by star navigators, celestial navigators at sea. When you were kind of finding your way around the oceans without a map, the beginnings of topography, people would get lost. And so you couldn't have any references within your vision on the surface, but you did have reference in the sky above. And so as sailors over centuries began to kind of notice patterns of stars rising and falling at different times of the year from different places, they began to be able to correlate where they were by using star phenomena. The British came up with some inventions that helped with this, and so the Greenwich meridian became the measuring point. So this means that when we get a person's date and time and place of birth, what we do is we look at the time of birth and we recorrect it to the Greenwich meridian. So if someone's born, say, in France, we take an hour off the birth time, just to kind of then do the astrological calculation of the appearance of planets and where they are. We do the same thing with latitude and longitude. So if someone's north or south of Greenwich, east or west of Greenwich. Okay. Okay, so far. Brilliant. Now, my birthday is the 1st of April. My birth certificate says the 1st of April. My driving license, passport, etc. all say the 1st of April. Society says I was born on the 1st of April. But when I started looking at astrology, I used to calculate birth charts by hand. And if I calculate an astrological birth chart by hand, that means I look at my birth time, which is the 1st of April. But because I'm a twin, I know exactly what time I was born. See, if a person's born in Scotland, the birth time is written down on the birth certificate. But if a person is born in England or Wales, the birth time is not written on the birth certificate. Drives astrologers mad. In a lot of countries, America, if someone's born in Hong Kong, the birth times are written down, but not in England, not in Wales. And that's because of Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell didn't like astrology, so he outlawed the noting of birth times on certificates, became illegal. But England didn't have any dominion over Scotland at the time, which is why Scotland write their times down, but the English and the Welsh don't. Right? Unless you're a twin. If you're a twin, the birth time must be written down because that saves arguing about who gets the estate later on. So you must know which of the two twins is the eldest, or three triplets, or 4 quadruplets. But still, the first one has their time written down, and so that you can know who's the eldest. And I was a twin when I was born, so I've always known that my birth time was 25 minutes past midnight, which is 00:25 a.m. on the 1st of April. But of course, that's in British summertime. When the government put an hour onto the clocks, we say the clocks go forwards is the phrase we use. Of course, we just turn the clocks forward. Time is just doing its thing in its way. The daffodils aren't going any faster, it's just the language with which we use to describe units of time has an adjustment. But this means that in order for my birth chart to be calculated at Greenwich, I had to take an hour off. And if I take an hour off from 25 minutes past midnight on the 1st of April, not only does that take me to the previous hour, making it 11:25 p.m., it also means that 25 minutes past 11 p.m. is the day before. Because I don't just go back an hour, I go back a day into the previous date. So my astrological birthday is the 31st of March, but my society birthday on all the documentation says 1st of April. So I have two. Why not? For me, I see the winter solstice, Yule, as the reverent moment. For me, that's when the solar cycle renews itself. The sun has reached the nadir, the bottom of the wheel. And in one moment, it changes from being the darkest of the sun to the beginning of light. And the very next day, there's an extra couple of seconds of daylight, and that incrementally grows all the way up to midsummer. So Christmas, to me, is the remnant of an old Roman festival of license and greed. And that's kind of what it's like, really. It's just a consumer fest, is how it seems. So for me, Yule is the contemplative, meditational, reverent moment, whereas Christmas is, meeting with friends and sharing presents and making people delight with what you can create or make for them. Likewise, then, my birthday, the 31st of March for me is the reverent moment, and the 1st of April is kind of, meal with friends and presents. And so I was born the day before my birthday, and I'm an accidental fool because if the clocks hadn't gone forward, my birth certificate, etc., would say 31st of March, but they don't. They say 1st of April. So I've always had this thing about being a funny kind of fool in a way. When I grew up, people would play April Fool's jokes. I became to expect them so much that people stopped because it got boring, which is a good thing, really. But still, this kind of foolness has sort of haunted me in a way. In esoteric lore, the fool is a magical spirit. The fool sees what others miss and misses what others see. And that was actually said to me by someone who has nothing to do with anything esoteric. I was being driven home by the keyboard player of the band I was in. I didn't have a car at the time. And on this Saturday morning in 1981, he said to me, some friends of mine have put a short film together. And I wondered, would you ever look at it and let us know what you think? I said, sure, but I don't know anything about films. Why are you asking me? And he said, because you see what others miss. And I said, right, and I miss what others see, as a joke. Not knowing about any mythos to do with the fool at all. But how very astute of him to notice this. I was an undiagnosed autistic person. I didn't get my autism diagnosis till I was 40. But that ability to kind of see what others miss, but also sometimes miss what others see, means that whenever I look at anything, I tend to look at it from a different perspective, a different lens. My astrology isn't standard astrology. My hypnotherapy isn't standard hypnotherapy. My NLP isn't standard NLP. Everything I do has a slight sort of, I guess, Rowan dynamic to it. Nothing I do is completely standard. Um, and I like that. I think that's rather cool because, of course, the only way you can be outstanding in life is to stand out. If you're exactly the same as everyone else, you're not outstanding. You're sort of instanding. Um, you know, that's not quite the same, is it? Uh, now, the first time I kind of saw a fool in the real world, um, other than a politician, no, I know, terrible joke, but still, someone who was a public figure embarrassing themselves was when I first saw Morris dancers. You might know that, well, you might not know that Morris dancers dance usually a troupe of six, sometimes eight, and they'll dance a dance, and the steps and things that they're doing sometimes have an esoteric kind of basis behind them. Like, for example, you might see dancers holding handkerchiefs, and they do this kind of thing by whirring the hankies around in a particular direction, and then they flick them away from themselves. And what's happening is they're picking up the evil spirits in the ground and then flicking them away. And they do this in a regimented kind of uniform pattern. But amongst them, there's this maverick figure, the fool, who wears a fool's coat. And he weaves in and out of the structure. And that's the magic. That's the wild spirit of nature. Human logic can say, let's do this, let's do that, these regimented things. But it's that organic wilderness, that kind of sense of uncertainty. That's the stuff that makes things come alive, you know. And the first time I saw someone doing this in Datchet, just outside Windsor, I got into conversation with this chap who's wearing a fool's coat, and he said to me that he was in the Fools Union. Who knew that? There's actually a Fools Union. And he was telling me, he's the magic. And everyone else dances in their patterns, and he weaves around them. And I thought, I love this. I really liked it. So I started to get involved in it. And the first time I ever danced out publicly, I didn't have any kit because everyone else had wives and things that would make their costumes. I had no family at all. So this man lent me his spare fool's coat. So the first time I ever did Morris dancing out in public, I was wearing a fool's coat, and that felt, yeah, I like that. um, yes, this is all leading somewhere, obviously. Now, when it comes to motifs of foolishness, I want to share some things with you. So hold on, let me just find this image to share. Yeah, can you see that? This is called the Fool's Map. It's old, as you can see. It's from the 15th century. It might be 16th, but I think it's 15th century. And at the time, it was considered that the ships that were just going off on foolish notions of finding paradise were literally a ship of fools, and that became a phrase that was used in the 16th century. So this map is attempting to show that the topography that the fool is hoping to either find, discover, vanquish, or conquer, depending on where you go. But for most people, their encounter with the notion of a fool will be through a thing called a set of tarot cards. And for a lot of people, the tarot card of the fool looks something like this. This is the fool in a deck called the Rider deck, Rider-Waite deck. And here you can see there's our fool. He's wandering along. He's not really looking where he's going. He's carrying a flower of innocence. And he's walking on a precipice here. A dog, his instinct is pulling at his leg, kind of trying to give an unheeded warning, it looks like. And he's proceeding in a very foolish, naive way. And this is not the original fool. This deck the rider deck was produced at the beginning of the 20th century. And it changed things. We're going to have a look at the older original version of a fall for about from the 1600s, which would be about 400 years earlier than this. But since the rider deck, a lot of modern tarot decks have kind of emulated it. They've kind of copied the motif, so you get variations in a theme. This is from the Merlin Tarot, and you can see there's our fool wandering along. He's got his belongings in a bag, and the flower is a sheepdog. There's time, and he's on a precipice. There are three of them here. Just modern versions, all of the same thing, just different art styles, showing a person oblivious to danger with instinct trying to catch their attention, and they appear oblivious to their better wisdoms. Yes, even in this version, this is a Celtic tarot drawn by Courtney Davis around 1991-ish. And here you can see he's not on a precipice. In fact, he's in the middle of space. He's leaping from one platform to another. So it's like a leap of faith, which is a slightly different slant on the meaning. But this is an earlier form. This comes from a deck that's now called the Tarot Classic Tarot, but it used to be the Tarot de Marseille, one of the very earliest woodcut tarots that became reproduced on a large scale once Gothenburg had invented the printing press. And here the fool has his belongings in a bag. There's the dog pulling at him, just like before, but he's on flat ground. You notice there's no danger, there's no precipice, there's no cliff edge. He's just walking in what looks like wide open countryside. And whenever I look at this, it reminds me of this. This is a book by the French philosopher Foucault, and it's called Madness and Civilization, kind of based around the idea that insanity has only existed since the age of reason. Because before the age of reason, if somebody was outlandishly chaotic, you would get a priest and do an exorcism. But at some point, that began to change. And there was a time when there was much more open common land, before a lot of land was purchased, as it were. And through the end of the 1600s and the beginning of the 1700s, more and more land was purchased by this new class of the middle classes, the merchant classes. Foundries were created, mills, mines, and small compact housing was built in these places to house the workers. Cottage industries began to fall by the wayside, and more people were almost maneuvered into these compact housings, which later became called slums. In the times before, if there was a village and someone was a misfit in the village, they would just go walking off, and the misfits would kind of wander through the woods and go up into the mountains and the hills and things, and just kind of live their own life. It could have been possible in the vast expanse of planet Earth to go wandering and not see another soul for years and years and years. And such isolation kind of does things to you, You start talking to yourself and getting answers coming back. So every now and again, I mean, if you could imagine being in the 13th century, you're ploughing your field and you see this kind of babbling person coming along with flies around the head, And these misfits were seen not just as walkers between places, but walkers between the worlds. And they were treated with a reverence, almost like shamanic figures. If a walker between the worlds came into your village, you might give them bread and soup in the hope that they will tell you messages from the ancestors or from the divine. And then once they'd stayed a while, they would just go wandering off again. once communities started to be put into these compact housing in these urban areas and urban spaces, the misfits couldn't go wandering anymore. The walkers between places had no places to walk. But throughout most of Europe, by the time you get to around uh, the beginning of the 1700s, leprosy had almost been entirely eradicated. But outside major cities, sometimes on remote hillsides, there were these large houses, the leper houses. So someone had the idea of putting the misfits in the leper houses. Now, these leper houses had already been associated with illness, with being unwell. And by having the misfits in the houses of the unwell, it began to associate difference with unwellness. Difference became an illness by association. And by the time you get to near the end of the 19th century, these people are now in small cells with a little spy hole in the door, and they'd be on the receiving end of the gaze. And that began psychotherapy and psychoanalytic psychotherapy, looking at people with intense scrutiny, making notes of their differences, and somehow deciding what of these characteristics are normal and ordinary, and what of these characteristics are disfigurements, unwelcome illnesses. There's a wide spectrum of humanity, and I don't know how to tell really who's okay and who isn't, who's normal and who isn't. I guess to a certain extent, if someone's behavior is largely self-caring, if someone's behavior is largely self-damaging, that's a clue. But then if you say that, wow, you look at how many human beings contribute to the damage of their ecosystem. You look at how many human beings purchase items made of plastic, pens, lampshades, shoes, bags. And yet they all know that all of these items made of plastic are perpetuating the petroleum industry. And they all know that that is contributing to the change in the ecosystem that one day will mean that their children won't be able to survive on this planet. And then ask yourself, who's mad? Who decides? Is it foolish to refrain from buying plastic things? Is it foolish to refrain from eating meat and flying in aeroplanes? Or is that just a daft thing of someone who has a green agenda? I think really the only thing we can do is just figure it out for ourselves. Whether or not a person is crazy or not kind of depends, I guess, on whether or not they're able to function safely in their environment, in their social dynamics. Because if I was kind of, kidnapped by a helicopter and dropped in a Papua New Guinea jungle, I wouldn't be able to survive. I'm not sure if a Papua New Guinea tribesman would be able to survive, in rural England or the middle of London. At least not initially, to a certain extent, we adapt to our context, don't we? We kind of understand the dynamics of where we are, mostly. Some people do, and some people don't. Not everybody falls through the holes of trauma. Some people experience trauma and learn how to survive. Some even learn how to thrive. A lot of people are sort of in the middle of all that, But whether one can say to any sense of certainty that they are sane when you look at the behaviors that we do on a daily basis towards ourselves, towards other people. Yeah, I think it's possibly a rare quality. I don't know how to measure it. I have no idea. Because I'm in this human process as well, and I have idiosyncrasies. I have incongruence. There are parts of me that have strength. There are parts of me that are vulnerable. There are parts of me that know things and parts of me that haven't got a clue. I'm both wise and clueless simultaneously. Yes. Uh, so, some foolish musings from an accidental fall. Uh, yes. Sometimes I think it's an advantage to see what others miss. It might be a disadvantage to miss what others see. Um, but for those of us that do see what others miss, we can find that new combination of musical notes that become exciting music. We can find that unusual combination of color, of imagery, of design that sparkles in the art world. We can find that unusual combination of components or of programming that create the brand new graphics that other people just go in and enjoy. The people that create things, the people that step outside, that go beyond the horizon of that which you know, they are rather maverick. It takes an adventurous spirit to be creative. It also takes a bit of courage as well. Because as soon as you aim towards something outstanding, by definition, you stand out. And as soon as you stand out, you are seen. And as soon as you stand out, you also become a potential target for tomatoes in the stocks on a Sunday afternoon. Yes, for some reason, we are unnerved by difference. We can feel apprehensive when we meet something that looks or sounds or seems or smells different to that which we know. And yet, at the same time, the inventiveness of humanity and the things that we love are all initially created by people who think in a maverick way. You know, yes. So I thought I'd make a little video, just some foolish musings about difference and the joy of difference, and sometimes how cool it is to be a fool. Take care. See you for another one of these. Bye.